Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about renting versus owning, specifically pertaining to wealth building.
So with that, we want to preface by saying we're talking about the average middle-class American. We're not talking about seasoned investors or high earners that are making several $100,000 a year or millions a year. We're typically speaking right at the average American. Maybe you're making, between 50 and 100 or maybe up to 150, whatever, but kind of more that range of middle-class America. And how renting versus owning impacts you differently for building wealth specifically. So there's going to be different scenarios where renting is definitely going to be better for where you're at in life, or owning is going to be better for where you're at. But we're just specifically talking about wealth building right now. So with that, we just wanted to bring up, I know a lot of people have heard this stat, but when you compare homeowners to renters, the average homeowner has 40 times as much wealth in their net worth compared to the average renter. And this is typically because of equity gains within home ownership. So they've bought a house, they've owned it for a long period of time, and as time goes on, that home becomes more valuable, and now they have access to that money, whether it's through a refinance, a HELOC, or any other financial means. Another purchase by selling, pulling the cash out, using it towards another home. But that's typically how you gain wealth through home ownership, is your home becomes more valuable over time. Now, there's always specific dips in the economy that may bring it down for a short period, but over the long term, it generally always goes up. We're in Utah specifically, and so if you would have bought a house in 1990 and you own that same house today, it would have gone up in value about 600% on average. That's crazy returns over 30 years. So just something to think about. Real estate is definitely a long-term game. It's not short-term, and I think that's where a lot of people get confused sometimes. Yeah. So why don't you start into kind of current costs and the differences with how that aligns as far as building wealth.
So currently, if you were to rent versus buying a home, rent is generally cheaper than a mortgage is. With that being said, though, that's generally your base cost of your rent. A lot of times you have HOA fees or club fees, extra parking spots they add on, pet fees, internet packages, anything like that they add on top of your base rent that people don't generally know about until they sign the contract, can actually put you closer to a mortgage payment than people actually realize or think about.
Yeah, so hypothetically speaking, if somebody was to rent out our house, maybe it costs them $2,000 for the base price, right? Yeah. But if they have pets, we're going to charge them more. If, here they wouldn't have to have specific internet packages, but they're limited on what they can use there. Yeah. If, they want other access to things. I mean, a lot of these extra fees kind of come up more in apartments and stuff like that. Yeah. When you're renting a specific house, you're going to have to go into what the landlords, you're going to have to cover the utility costs and all that type of stuff. And the other thing with renting is a lot of people don't think they pay for maintenance. If it's wear and tear, general wear and tear that is just life of the product or whatever, then yeah, the landlord's going to cover that. But anything that you do damage to, I promise that in most situations you're paying for. And so you clog a toilet, you flood a bathroom, you put a hole in a carpet that has 5 more years of life in it. Those, you're going to get charged for those things.
They may cover it up front and call somebody, but you're getting charged on the back end.
You're going to get
like that.
You're going to get billed. And so generally, current up front, your rent is going to be cheaper
Yeah.
than a mortgage payment in most situations. That varies depending on area, on how close it is, right? Where you're at in a state or which state you're in. But currently, if you were to think year one over a year time period, yes, I'm gonna save money renting. That generally holds true almost everywhere,
Yeah.
and in most economic situations. But you have to do something with that money you save, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. What about the future costs? Because when we're talking about building wealth, a lot of it, we got to look forward, right? We're not going to build wealth over a year, versus renting and owning. It's going to be a wash basically, but as far as we look at the future, what are some of the differences as far as wealth building goes?
If you have a fixed rate mortgage, your mortgage payment stays the same. The only thing that potentially changes is property taxes and homeowners insurance. Those will go up a little bit over time, but the base mortgage payment stays the same. Rent is most likely going to change every single year, sometimes every 6 months, depending on your lease.
Anytime your lease comes due, right, the landlord has an opportunity to raise the rent, and you either have to agree with it or move out.
Find somewhere else to live.
So if you're on a month-to-month lease, you may think that's great because you can move out whenever you are, but that also gives your landlord the opportunity to raise your rent every single month or every 3 months or every 4 months, because you're just on month to month. So if you have a year locked in, that's great. Sometimes you can do longer than that. But generally your rent increases.
I think we've seen since the pandemic, the rent was able to increase a lot, and a lot of landlords now are not doing longer than year leases because they don't want themselves to be locked in and not be able to raise rents. So I think that's something you're also seeing now. And you never know how much they're going to raise your rent. They could raise it $50 a month, they could raise it $500 a month, and you don't know until your lease is close to due, and then that potentially puts you in a bind.
Typically, they're going to try to raise it to what market rate is, right? For that type of property, that type of area, and that, like I said, it could be $10, it could be a couple $100, but that's something you're going to have to account for every single year, or at least every time your lease comes due. So those are big differences as far as outlook for the future. The other thing when you're looking for the future, as we're talking about rent increases versus your mortgage payment, which can stay relatively steady unless you refinance and change the terms, right? That can always happen, but we don't know what people are going to do once they get into a home, how they're going to redo their terms or whatnot. So we're talking, you get a mortgage, you keep it for the 30 years, and eventually it gets paid off. Rent never gets paid off, right? You're always renting, it's always increasing for the most part, and eventually, it's a long ways down the road, but eventually you can own a house free and clear, no mortgage. It can be 100% yours, and it provides you a lot of options in that way.
Like you talked about, if you bought a house here in the 90s, your house is paid off now. You own that house, and that 600% gain is yours. You get all of that cash.
So, it's tied up in your house still, but you have options
to access it.
You have options to access it, correct? And so if you had a family emergency come up or whatever, you don't want to have to sell your home or pull out another loan, but it's there if you need it, and that does go into your net worth calculation. As we look at the future as well with renting versus owning, is we talked about it a little bit as far as you're going to have slight increases in your property taxes and your insurance, right? You're going to have insurance increases on your rent, but then also just that percentage difference. I just wanted to make a point about that growth difference is going to be severely heavy on the rental side, and generally not so heavy on the mortgage side. We bought our first house like a decade ago, right? And when we purchased it, it was more than what we could have went and rented a similar place for, right? Today, I'd say we're probably close to 40% of what market rent would be for our house, right? And our mortgage payment. And
even what a mortgage payment would be now.
Exactly. So that's, if somebody had to rent our place out, we're under what we would charge, 50% at least, and as far as that goes. So, and we've had our house for 10 years, right? Think about the difference 20, 30 years down the road. You may be only paying 10, 20% of what it may cost in the future for a rental or a new mortgage payment down the road. And so that's the crazy thing to think about is real estate is long term. You have to think long term. If you're comparing the short term or the current prices, it's easy to get caught up in that you save more money renting.
Yeah.
But in the long run, you generally don't. And when we're talking about wealth building, every time you make that rental payment, it goes to the landlord.
Every time you make a mortgage payment, it will come back to you at the end.
Right. You have interest.
Yes,
right?
You don't get your interest back.
No,
but
you're borrowing money from somebody. Somebody is helping you own a home, and so you're paying them for that. And so you don't get that portion of it back, but all the principal you pay, you'll get back plus the equity. And in a lot of situations, the equity gain over the long term will take away the interest payments, and you'll be profitable on that side of it. So now let's just quick talk about, we talked about the current and the future as far as renting versus owning, but let's say you take the rental route and you're saving money on what a current mortgage would be. Okay, now you have a difference. Let's say there's a $500 difference between the mortgage you would be paying and the rent you're currently paying.
Yeah.
Does that $500 automatically build you wealth? I mean,
no, you would have to put it somewhere
right.
to build you wealth, which takes a lot of conscious effort, and I don't think most of us are good at doing that.
Well, statistically speaking, when you look at all the reports on what people do with their extra money at the end of the month,
it's not save or invest.
Exactly. Most people struggle with investing and saving when they have a few $100s left over. Usually it goes towards lifestyle upgrades. Yeah. And so they'll buy a new pair of clothes. They will do a weekend out. They will, buy food, the new toy they've been wanting, the new technology gadget, whatever it is, whatever floats your boat as far as what you like to spend your money on. When we have leftovers, the typical American person does not put it aside. They spend it.
Yeah.
And so you may be renting, you may be saving money compared to a mortgage in the current climate, but what are you doing with the savings? Are you putting it in something that's going to build you more money than it would be building you if you were putting it into a mortgage and participating in the equity gains? Yeah. Typically mortgages or home values haven't been regular for several years. Yeah. We had intense increases, and then we've kind of had a plateau the last year or so. Yeah. But over the course of the long run, mortgages typically go up 3 to 5% per year. So you have to put that $500 you're saving or $300 you're saving renting every year, and you have to be able to invest it and be making more money than you are if you were to be putting it into a mortgage and getting that back on the back end.
Yeah.
And again, that future cost comes into the fact. You may be at first saving money, but it may only last for a couple of years, right? If your rent is $2,000 and it would cost you $2,600 to have a mortgage on a similar place, you're saving that $600 right now. But how long does it take for your rent to become $2,500 or $2,600? Maybe it's only 3 or 4 years. And so you take that $500 a month over 4 years, how much did you actually save? And now you're actually over that mortgage payment. And now you're not saving anything anymore, you're paying more.
And now the mortgage costs more.
But now if you were on to jump back into a house, at that point, the mortgage costs more too. Yeah. And so, those are things to just think about. If you want to build wealth, generally it's to get into owning property quicker, so you can participate in those equity gains. It's a forced savings / investment account. you have to pay your mortgage or you're gonna get kicked out. You're forced to do it. If you have a track record that money you save, you can use well towards wealth building, then fantastic.
Then renting might be the option for
Yeah,
you.
fantastic. But most people we've worked with or that we have conversations with, that's where they struggle. Is
We also have struggled
Oh,
with
yeah,
that in the past.
100%. You're like, oh man, it was a great month. I got, a couple $1,000 extra bucks to do something with. Let's go on vacation.
Yep.
Instead of putting it into an investment or saving it or whatever. I think everybody struggles with it.
Yeah.
So for the average American, this is what we're talking about. The stats don't lie as far as when you look at the average renter versus the average homeowner. They build equity, and it's something they can tap into when it's needed. It's not cash that you can have access to daily, but it does go towards your net worth calculation. And in case you do need it, there's a process to get it. Whether that's selling, whether it's refinancing, whether it's pulling other financing against the home with HELOCs, or paying off credit cards and cars by wrapping it into the mortgage, whatever it is, it's money you have access to if needed.
And there's multiple options to access it as well.
Mm-hmm. So I know most people that want to do renovations, they tap into the equity. Mm-hmm. Most people, if they have an emergency come up and they max their credit cards out, they tap into the equity to get those things paid down or to, help out, and so it's kind of like a safety net.
Yeah.
So we're big believers that if you're concerned about building wealth, homeownership is the place to start. It's the easiest place to start. Yeah. And up front for the first few years, you're probably paying more than what you would be if you were renting a like kind property. Yeah. But over time, you'll be in the green on that calculation, and you have already been putting money away towards your mortgage. And then once you're in the green compared to the rental costs, now you can save that difference, because hopefully you're getting promotions at work, you're making more money. That's the other thing we didn't touch on is at current point in time, you're making X amount of dollars.
Yeah.
I think everybody 5 years down the road expects to be making more or wants to be making more, right?
Yeah.
Your rent is going to keep going up as you make more money, which means you're still saving or spending more versus what you make. You take a mortgage out, you buy a house, it stays relatively the same, but you make more money, so you start being able to save more. And that's one thing we have to discuss with a lot of our first-time buyers is that upfront, it's going to be tight. There's just, with the cost of homes and everything, there's no way around it unless you just have a killer job and you make a lot of money right now, or you have a lot of inheritance or something like that. If you're a first-time buyer, it's going to be tight, but it will get more comfortable as time goes. As you make more money, as your mortgage stays the same while you make more money, that's where the real comfortable situation comes in. I know that we would not have been able to do a lot of the things we've done in life if we waited on buying.
Yeah. It gave us a lot of opportunities to change careers, to send you back to school, and you didn't have to work, to do a lot of things that we wouldn't have been able to. And I think about it like you have to pay for housing either way. If you can afford that extra jump to pay for a mortgage instead of renting, in the long run, you'll probably be glad and thankful to your younger self.
Yeah. And that, so food for thought as far as, what the future looks like, because when we talk about building wealth, it's got to be future oriented. It can't be focused on today. No. And I think that's where a lot of people get caught up. Today, this is cheaper, and for your plans, if you're not going to be in a place long term, if you're not going to live in an area for more than a year, you'd be crazy to buy. If you're not staying put, don't buy. You're going to lose money when you try to get rid of that property. So renting is what you need to do right there. Typically you need to be planning on staying in a place 3 to 4 or more years to make buying the smart automatic decision. So if you're anywhere less than that, you have to really run your numbers to see if it's smart and what is the current climate of your economic markets and which direction are they moving. So got any closing thoughts on that?
I just think it's just something to look into for people. I think a lot of people don't think about it and just automatically see that lower base rental price and they're like, this is the better option.
Yeah.
And it is sometimes, and that's fine. But for a lot of people, it's a lot more attainable than I think they realize at first. And then you get that long-term wealth growth while also owning your own place.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about owning your own place and doing what you want to it.
Right, the freedom of being able to do whatever you
That
want.
has nothing to do with wealth gain, but outside of what renovations you choose to do, it can make your values go up more or not go up quite so much based on what you're paying to do them. But there's just a freedom of owning your place and not having to, be at the whims of a landlord. That's peace of mind to me. So
the enjoyment of knowing you get to choose what your house looks like and feels like.
So thanks for listening to us on this topic on wealth building versus rent to own. So if you have questions, leave them in the comment. Be sure to subscribe. Helps out a lot. Anything else you're going to leave them with?
No. Catch you next time.